So far in Photoshop, we've used some various methods to create selections, including the really basic stuff like rectangular marquee and lasso tool, and some of the more advanced tools like select and mask. But there's one really important method that we haven't talked about yet, and that's using the pen tool. Using the pen tool is a very direct and manual way to create selections, but it's actually one of the most favored ways to do it amongst professionals. It's particularly good in situations like this. If we want to cut out these rings, the select and mask tool will do a pretty decent job, but since there's a really smooth angular shape to these rings, it's going to be hard for a select and mask to get that selection to maintain that perfect geometry. So the pen tool is going to do a better job. And even though it takes a little bit of time to use, it's, like I said, still one of the best ways to work. So always keep in mind, what are you trying to select? If it's something with a ton of detail like hair, select and mask is probably the way to go. But if it's something with a really defined shape, the pen tool is often the way to go in those situations. So let's go ahead and select the pen tool. You can also click on P to get that tool. And when we use the pen tool, we're going to be creating what's called a path. So there's this little tab over here. It's usually grouped with the layers panel. It's called the paths panel. Okay, there's nothing in it right now, but that's where what we're drawing is going to go to. Okay, so for now, let's go back to layers and let's start drawing using the pen tool. This is going to work very similar to how it's worked in other Adobe programs. Okay, so I'm actually going to select one ring at a time here. Okay, and if we work to use, not too many points here, we're going to get that really smooth curve, and that is going to look really good. And it's going to be very true to the actual shape that we're selecting. Okay, so I didn't use too many points here. Okay, we're going to have to refine the shape just a little bit. Okay, and we can always go and grab the direct select tool to do that. Okay, so let's just refine our shape. Okay, bring that handle in. And just make some adjustments. Okay, so this is going to work very similar, like I said, to the other pen tools in other programs like Illustrator. And just like Illustrator, if we work to use few points, we're going to create kind of a smoother curve. Okay, so instead of having a bunch of little points, in this case, just 4 points is actually enough to define the shape. You could do a few more, that wouldn't be a big problem. But now we're going to have a very smooth selection, and that's going to be a little more true to the shape that we're trying to select. So since we're selecting this ring, we also need to make a second path for the inside of the ring as well. Okay, because if we create a selection using the path that we just created, it's going to select everything, including the inside. So you'll notice that if I go to the paths tool here, there's a new path that got created called the work path. And the work path is sort of like a temporary path that automatically gets created. Okay, but the thing about the work path is you have to rename it to something else if you want to keep that path long term. So if I just go ahead and click off to deselect that path, and then I go back to the pen tool and start drawing a new path, you'll see that my old work path got deleted, and the new shape that I just created is now the work path. Okay, so I don't want that to happen, so I'm going to go ahead and step backwards a few times to get my old path back. And this time what I'm going to do is double click on the name and rename this path to something else. Okay, so I can rename this right ring outside. Okay, and now, even if I go ahead and create a new path, that is always going to stay, in the paths panel. Okay, so I don't have to worry about overwriting that after I rename it. Okay, so that's our first path. Let's go ahead and, again, deselect this path, and then go ahead and draw a new path on the inside of the ring using the pen tool. So let's go ahead and do that. And we actually might be able to start on these endpoints here. Okay. There we go. Okay, and when you're working with the pen tool, you can always hold down Option and then go back and adjust those handles. There we go. Okay, so that looks pretty close. Let's go ahead and take the direct select tool so we can get this to be exactly right. Okay, and again, by using less anchor points, I'm able to create something more smooth. All right, so now we have a new work path. Let's go ahead and call this right ring inside. Okay, so now I have two paths, and I can do different things with these paths. Okay, so if I go to the pen tool and I select a path, you can see that there's a few options up here. These are some of the different things that you can do with that path. So I can make a selection with the path, I can create a mask, or I can create a shape. Okay, so if I want to create some sort of shape, I can use this path, click on shape, and now this becomes an actual shape path that I can do different things with. Same with mask. Okay, so this is called a vector mask. It's not used as much as a layer mask, but it has similar properties. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and undo that. What we're going to do in this case is create a selection. So I'm going to select the outside ring shape. I'm going to go to selection. Okay, when I click that, a little window is going to pop up. And by the way, you can also get to this even if you're not in the pen tool by just right-clicking or alternate clicking on the path and going down to make selection. So that's going to get you to the same area. When I do this, a few options come up. One is the feather radius, and usually it's good to put just a little bit of feathering in there just to create a more natural selection. So I'm going to put 0.3, so not even a whole pixel. So it's a very little amount of feathering, but again, it's going to get some of the jaggedness off of that selection. And then I have a few options here. I'm going to choose new selection. I actually can't choose any of these other selections because that requires an existing selection to be active. So I'm going to do new selection. Okay, and you'll see I'll get the marching ants around the ring. And then I'm going to select the inside path. Okay, and then right click on that, go to make selection. I'm going to keep the same feather, but this time I'm going to go to subtract from selection. Okay, so when I do that, it's going to subtract this area, and now I have, the exact selection that I want. So if I go to layers, I can now do things like apply a layer mask to this layer. And now I have the ring cut out. And again, since I worked hard to get those curves really smooth, you can see that if I put this on a color, okay, the selection is really smooth and represents just the ring itself. So this is a really great way to work, and it's definitely good to practice using the pen tool. It's very underutilized by amateurs, but like I said, for professionals, it's the go-to selection tool, even though it takes a little bit more time.